Well, good morning and welcome everybody to this panel on taking a whole system approach to the transition. And this is a quite an interesting challenge, really, isn't it? Because I call this the everything, everywhere, all at once challenge. So given that, in a way, net zero and the transition to it encompasses everything, how can we take a system approach? How can we benefit from that system approach? I think we've also just seen in the last 24 hours with the electricity system some of the challenges that one can have when you've got a highly interconnected system and the things that can happen from that. But it's not just that interconnection and breaking down the silos, it's that lifecycle sustainability in energy infrastructure, and it's that cross-sector collaboration, a whole systems approach. So that's what I'm looking to do in this panel today, is have a discussion. I've got a number of great people joining me, and I'm going to ask them now to introduce themselves. I'll work my way down the line, and I'll turn to Joe. Please introduce yourself and your perspective on the whole systems approach to the transition, Joe.
Hi, so I'm Joe, co-founder, CEO at TEM. I've actually been in energy for about 15 years. Actually sold our last renewable energy company to a big energy company. So I've seen the whole transaction and transformation over the last 10, 15 years. With TEM, we kind of sit here to reflect the need for a overhaul and transition on the actual electricity transaction itself. So really starting to look at challenging the wholesale market, and I think turning a disengaged and disempowered group of customers and users, businesses predominantly in the UK, into a much more empowered position to get access to the energy they need at much lower cost.
Thank you, Joe. Over to you, Randolph.
Yeah, thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Randolph. I'm Global Head of Power Systems at HSBC. I sit within our climate transition team. And my role is very much to work with customers to help them decarbonise. We have our own net zero financed emission targets by 2050. We have a net zero transition plan. We're committing up to $1 trillion out to 2030 to support our clients on their transition. From a whole systems perspective, our clients don't care about a single solution or a single technology or a single vector. They're interested in decarbonising their operations at lowest cost with a reliable solution that's actually a better solution than incumbent fossil solutions. So we want to work with them, help them, and we have to design financial products to support them to enable that decarbonisation. We also don't just look at the end project or end solution and end product. We look at the whole value chain, the whole supply chain, right from that end project all the way back to the raw materials. These supply chains are often very globalized, very complex, but as HSBC, that's something that we're specifically set up to support, and hence we have a range of products to help them throughout the journey. We also work with a range of different types of clients, from big end users of energy and big producers of energy, right through to startups like Joe. And we have a range of different products where we even help early stage companies access finance to help them scale. And we also leverage our ecosystem to connect them to those big users to help everyone decarbonise. And just a final point, we don't just do this out of the goodness of our own heart to meet our targets. That's a nice bonus. But we do it to support customers because they're interested in it, because these solutions are better, they're lower cost, they're reliable, and at the end of the day, they're also profitable. So yeah, looking forward to the panel.
Great, that's very interesting. So carrying on the sort of theme, over to you, Rosalind.
Hello, Quimbrook Infrastructure Partners. We are energy transition infrastructure investors. And taking that big term of energy transition, what do we look at? Well, firstly, it's just the UK, the US, and Australia. That's not because we don't speak other languages. That is because of comparable rule of law and a decarbonisation mix. We are looking at clean generation. We are looking holistically at how you integrate clean generation into the grid, which means that we build a lot of synchronous condensers, things that I believe Spain and Portugal will be building quite a lot of following yesterday. We also invest in storage because it's not always windy and it's not always sunny. But picking up on your theme there, Randolph, of that integration approach, we also invest in sustainable data centers. Every time you send a meme, that carbon cost of the meme is far more than a lot of Gen Zers would like to know. And we also are looking at how that powered land can affect upstream, which for us is manufacture of our equipment. The solar panels have a high carbon cost if they're made with coal-powered energy. And lastly, I think the systems approach needs to acknowledge, are we talking about just power, which is home turf for me? 50% of UK renewables comes from renewables. Or are we talking about energy systems bigger? Because actually, the biggest emitter of carbon in the UK now is transport. Transport produces more than double the carbon emissions of electricity. So that's 23% of our emissions from carbon and 11% from electricity. So we need to think, are we talking about systems or just power? And if power is going to be providing the energy for these systems, again, how do we do that in a sustainable and affordable manner?
Excellent. So there is a real challenge that we want to default to talking about energy, because we're going to do that a lot, but you remind us that we've got to keep a systems context, especially if we want to decarbonise. Mark.
Great, thanks Paul. Morning everyone, delighted to be here today. I lead Arup's energy business across the UK, India, Middle East, Africa. If you haven't heard of Arup before, we're an employee-owned engineering consultancy headquartered here in London. And from an energy business perspective, we're very focused on working with our clients to help deliver the transition to a low-carbon, resilient, affordable energy future. And we think in order to do that, you need to consider those problems through 4 lenses. You need an engineering solution that works, you need a project you can deliver, something you can finance, and an understanding for what it means for people and consumers and neighbourhoods. We're active across all elements of the energy system. So we have a renewables team, a high voltage team, a nuclear team, an urban energy team, and a hydrogen, CCUS and clean fuels team. I think when it comes to, and the sort of services that we provide span all the way from strategic advice for government, so we're DESNZ's hydrogen technical advisors, nuclear technical advisors. We've been working with the Crown Estate on leasing rounds, and then we work all the way through the project lifecycle, supporting investment decisions in projects, and techno-economic feasibility studies, planning and consenting, and then into engineering, design and delivery. I think from today's conversation, I think the rubber really hits the road when you start to talk locally. So what does it mean in local communities? We've been doing a lot of local area energy plans for local authorities, looking at what does that transition look like at a local scale when you start considering transport, heat, electrification, the role of hydrogen. And so we've developed all of these plans for local authorities on what we think that future energy system, whole system looks like. And then the really interesting challenge is, how do we deliver it? How do we finance it? How do we fund it? What's the innovative delivery models that are required? How do we take consumers on that journey with us, take the public with us on that journey? So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Yes, so let's get going on that conversation. To remind you, we have Slido running. If you have any questions for the panel, we'll weave those in. Please take a picture of the QR code and Slido us as part of this. So I'm going to pick up from Mark's challenge on this. So one way to take a whole systems approach is to try that on a smaller scale, on a local scale, and local energy action plans are one way of doing that we've been doing in the UK. Does that work? Can we get that system integration? Is there enough scale at that local in order to give us the financial investment that we're going to require, but also the decarbonisation that we're going to need to deliver? So I'll turn to actually Roslyn. Would you like a first go at that question?
Oh, I wish I was going to be more positive and not say the word no. Why do I say the word no? I need to move a needle significantly on the investments that we make. And what I mean by move the needle is there is a high opportunity cost when you look at an investment. If I am looking at a small-scale investment that is costing £100,000 or £1 million, it takes as much internal work to diligence it properly as it does to make a £400 million investment. And I need to deploy at scale to deliver returns for investors. It is the fundamental thing of what I do. I do not have a philanthropic allocation. I have to deliver returns. And to deliver returns, I need opportunities to have bankable counterparties. Again, a challenge if you are talking about residential homeowners. What I need is an investment grade off-taker, such as Tesco's, who just bought 65% of the power that we're generating at Cleve Hill Solar Park. That solar park has the equivalency of about 100,000 homes it can power. But if I were to sell that power directly, which I can't thanks to the structure of the grid, but those 100,000 homeowners wouldn't come together to be a bankable offtake. And that is what I need to see in the structuring of the projects that I am delivering.
So local might be tractable, as Mark's argument, but you're saying it hasn't got the scale to the investability. Would you agree, Randolph, with that from your perspective? And it's the debt equity balance here we're talking about in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I somewhat agree with it.
It's a good debate.
But I think you can have both. So if you think about an organisation like HSBC, we work with very large generators and very large users, but we also support individual homeowners. We provide residential mortgages in the UK, for example. And we want to help everyone decarbonise, right? Rosalind is right that scale is important and that can bring down costs. So that's why when we look at solutions, particularly for smaller players in the space, we look at how we can leverage technology. Joe's a good example of that. Leverage technology and design products and solutions that can enable aggregation of smaller solutions or technologies or players, and then aggregate that up to get scale, which can help bring down costs. But you're never going to get away from the fact that there needs to be local solutions and national or large-scale solutions. The grid is a very good example of this, right? There's this sort of notion that everyone's going to become energy independent and just generate all their own power in their home or business, store enough of it, and effectively go off-grid. I mean, at the end of the day, though, in this country at least, all the winds in the north, all the suns in the south, and a lot of the demand's in the middle, right? So we're still going to need a large-scale grid, at least to fill in the gaps when you can't produce locally. So I would say a slight nuance on what Rosalind's saying. You need local and large-scale solutions.
Yeah, I think that point that you make when we're taking a systems approach about aggregation is key. So it's getting the scale of making a difference, but the scale of them making it also investable and actually operable, I think is the thing you're saying. So Joe, from your perspective, you're at the heart of some of these sort of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the way we look at it is inevitable that there's going to be large-scale infrastructure needs, large-scale investment decisions, and that will benefit potentially large-scale big energy or large-scale companies. Our job is looking at, okay, how do we actually empower the 99% who don't have access to that and aren't going to get those benefits from system reform? We really want to avoid a situation where system reform means, okay, we're not building big coal power stations or gas power stations, we're now just building big wind turbines.
Yeah.
And that actually means the empowerment of those that have been disadvantaged from a centralized system for quite literally 100 years stay disempowered in this new model. I think there's huge opportunity, but I think it requires two things, right? You do need technology and disruption to come into that energy space to empower the scalability of these solutions, right? To offer what Tesco has to a family-owned bakery requires huge amounts of automation and technology empowerment. Luckily, we're at the first time in history where that's genuinely possible, especially with the proliferation of AI and the advancements there. Secondly, this is where the government and GB Energy can play such an important role. Large infrastructure funds will find a way to deploy capital. What we can see is the opportunity that GB Energy can play in empowering local communities to actually get the investment grade projects for those smaller with good credit offtake and backing from the government. And that empowers those local communities to also benefit from the power and create a much closer relationship to the power they generate, the power that they use, and keep that empowerment within them. And I think we just got to be cautious. If we allow predominantly big energy to build big projects, we're going to end up with the same fundamental dynamics between system players and the power imbalance that sits there.
So you're kind of arguing for kind of mixture and diversity in the system as well. And if you look at Great British Energy's early investments in the solar for schools and hospitals, you can begin to see that local flavour, and GB Energy definitely, I know, is thinking about how it can play a different role in the system as part of that. So Mark, one of the questions on Slido, just to bring us to local, what have you found works really well at local, but what have you found the pain points to be of working at local? So, Rosalind said the pain point for her is it's too small in some senses. So what are the challenges that you've found?
Yeah, so I think some of the solutions that we've been looking at has been, the rooftop-mounted solar that you've just been discussing, the local generation. How can you get as much generation as local as possible? Where do you make those kind of decisions about where it's right to put a large-scale heat network in? Where do you make the decision that what you need to do is to reinforce the electricity network? Where might it be appropriate for us to be using hydrogen? Though that kind of mixture and blend of solutions is what's coming out of the local area energy plans. But then to Rosalind's point, absolutely the challenge is how do you then implement? How do you aggregate this up? What's the delivery vehicle that's going to turn the plan into something that actually happens? And I think there's a need to think really carefully about what's the role of the regional energy system planner in this process? What's the role of the local authority in starting to aggregate and drive investable projects? So I think that's the next big challenge now that we've got these kind of a very clear kind of picture of what a future energy integrated whole system might look like. How do you then get it delivered? How do you fund it? How do you invest in it? And that, I think, is the next really big challenge, which needs to be thought about through that kind of governance and accountability lens. And then how do you bring along the investment vehicles and make it investable at scale across a wide area? So it's not sort of necessarily looking at individual projects, but a whole portfolio of interventions. The last thing you want to do is allow the private sector to invest in the EV charging infrastructure and take all the solar, roof-mounted solar projects, but leave behind the hard stuff of how do you retrofit social housing? How do you get the heat pumps installed? Where's the less profitable bits? So how do you construct a portfolio that has return on investment in some areas, but then subsidises the bits that are unlikely to be investable in their own right?
So I think that's an interesting question about, and Joe's raised the same point about what is the public-private sector partnership in this area. And I've got one about a question here, I think, about somebody wanting me to privatise the grids as well. Can you discuss a nationalisation versus privatisation for the next generation of utilities and grid companies? But I want to take that wider, because I think in this systems integration question, that public-private partnership and the role of the public sector and the role of the private sector becomes critical. Because if it is the private sector only funds what is profitable, and the public sector is only funds what is not profitable, how is that going to work in a sense? Because we know the amount of investment required outstrips that sort of model. So Rosalind, come on.
Well, okay. So firstly, it's £40 billion a year to be invested by the end, and this is from the starting gun of January 1st this year. So over the next 6 years, taking January the 1st this year as the start, £40 billion per year needs to be invested to deliver CP30. That's to deliver the tripling of solar, the doubling of onshore wind, and the quadrupling of offshore wind, and the 5-fold increase in storage. We don't have £40 billion a year to come from the public purse, right? So it's actually an increase in what was spent in the previous 4 years, each of this decade, of 1.5% of GDP. I welcome everyone to read NESO's CP30, because that sets out the challenge. And it's more than just that, it's also 60 billion needs to be spent on grid reinforcement. And that is begun over the next 5.5 years. Treasury does not have the money. So what we need is some policy certainty, because there is not an infinite sum of money to invest in these projects. And what we are facing is when you are procuring investment, why should an investment be made with a limited sum in the UK versus an opportunity in Australia versus an opportunity in Poland versus an opportunity in Italy, etc. So I think we also need to be very cognizant here in the UK of our ability to make ourselves a very attractive market for investment. And when you are attractive, you induce a competitive tension to be the country that people want to invest in, which drives down the cost. So that would be the way to drive down the cost of investment here, and the way to drive up the cost would be to crowd out rather than crowd in monies, to introduce a lot of policy uncertainty on where we are trying to invest. And I think that is incredibly important that we're cognizant of that at a time when we are going to be retiring all bar one of our standing nuclear plants because of age. Not policy, age. Only Hinkley is going to be coming online, and only Sizewell B is going to be still operating in the 2030s. We are retiring a third of our gas because of age. And we need to, the vast sums we need to invest in can also be translated to a sum of scale of, I am building the only solar NSIP that has been consented so far. No one else has broken ground. We got our consent in July 2020 and are on the cusp of being operational. Why is that important? We need 86 solar NSIPs at the equivalent size of Cleve Hill to be operational by the end of 2030 to hit our capacity targets. So that is why I'm saying, and I apologise for Radio Ros, everybody, but what I'm trying to emphasise here is to make this affordable, we have to have policy certainty, and you need to not be crowding out and making the UK a less competitive market than others right now.
Yeah,
Okay,
can I
go on.
jump
I was going to go
Yeah.
to you, Randolph. I was just checking how much solar is producing at the moment. It's 8.82 gigawatts this morning, which is actually more than wind. If you work for the department, you always know how much energy is being produced at any given time. Anyway, carry on.
I'm just going to agree with Rosalind. You know, you cannot do this separately, private and public. Private and public partnerships and finance needs to come together. We work in around 60 odd countries, and we work with a range of different private organisations and public organisations. And I think there's a very important role for government to play to help de-risk solutions, technologies, projects, etc., through a range of different mechanisms. Could be the CFD regime here in the UK, it could be guarantees, it could be creating standard offtake agreements, etc. But it's absolutely essential to bring together private and public partnerships to help de-risking. And this is especially the case with riskier or earlier stage technologies that need a bit of a leg up to get started, particularly in harder to abate sectors. This is what this is why we're looking and have invested in HSBC Innovation, to look at those earlier stage companies and to try and support them and help scale them up. In terms of the scale of the problem, you mentioned 40 billion. In terms of the global challenge, in terms of investment for the power sector, between the end of last year and 2030, it's 8.4 trillion.
Yeah.
So the scale is enormous. Like you said, the public purse definitely can't cover that. So try and use the public purse to catalyse private investment and private finance. And this is something that we do a lot of at HSBC. A good example of this is a joint venture that we set up in Singapore called Pentagreen Capital. It's a JV between us and Temasek, which is the Singaporean Sovereign Wealth Fund. And this vehicle is looking to invest in marginally bankable renewables in Southeast Asia, stuff that typically wouldn't get financed by itself privately because there might be a slightly higher risk profile. So it's absolutely critical to bring together the private and public partnerships.
Joe, I suspect you want to give us a slightly different perspective on this.
I mean, yes and no. I think absolutely it's collaborative. And just to set the context, I hear this a lot. And it's so important, like we talk about CP30. When we talk about the need for reform and the combination of private government, the reason it's so important that both parties are in the room is this isn't an environmental battle. This shouldn't be turned into a cultural war, right? This is actually so much bigger about basically setting up what is the next world order, in the sense of compute and the race for intelligence ultimately also is derived by what is the lowest cost of power, electricity. So if you can produce electricity sovereign stable at lower cost, you're going to have a competitive advantage in the world order. And we need to be very cautious here that if we were to just build big wind, big coal, big nuclear, we are never going to be competitive against, say, China and India. But where we have our own unfair advantage over pretty much the last 200 years is the environmental benefits. It's the tides, it's the wind. And in order to unlock that, you need the government to understand that this is a battle for financial security, business competition, it's inflation. All of this will come back to energy costs. So if you put too much trust in the private sector to do the right thing for the country, probably not going to work out. Equally, if you don't provide the right incentives and indications about where that investment needs to be made, you're not going to get the capital. So it's really important to think about that as a holistic system and ensure, for me, I look at three things, right? If we could reform the electricity wholesale market, decouple it, that's a great start. If we could inject extreme transparency to allow for more competition privately, both in investment, both in new infrastructure, but also in the actual transaction and the utility space, that's great. And if we can incentivize that decentralized as well as centralized thinking and deployment of assets, we can then come up with a more competitive system compared to most other nations. That's not going to come from one big energy company or only the state. That has to be a combination of a much bigger ecosystem, which is why I'm so excited to sit on a panel of individuals that hopefully are able to drive that as examples of the rest of the people today at the conference.
No, I think that's really interesting because actually you're presenting, the major theme so far has been about aggregation. It's been about aggregation to de-risk. It's been aggregation, but the public and private working in partnership. I think we've got that strong sense of it. But we've also got that aggregation to give us the scale. But actually there's an argument also that you're giving in a systems approach that we need to disaggregate to a certain extent as well. And Mark and you, Joe, are arguing that we need to think about the local building blocks sensibly because we won't be able to do this with just major scale energy projects. We need to rethink the whole of the system. And I think you're all saying that government has got to provide that clear, stable policy framework that allows the public and the private to drive through that sort of change. Does Clean Power 2030 give you that stable policy framework? He says, leading question. Mark?
Yes, I think having read through the NESO report, there's lots of great stuff in there in terms of the size and scale of the ambition, the clarity it brings in terms of the focus on build out of offshore wind, the need to continue the massive transformation of the electricity system and the investment that's required there, and the tripling of investment in renewables, the tripling of investment in transmission networks, and all of that is going to be coming from private sector funding. So I think Clean Power 2030 really provides that catalyst, that drive, that ambition that should enable the private sector to have confidence that the government is serious about delivery. I think we've spoken a lot about the word aggregation. I think the other really important word here is around coordination, and the role of government in helping to sequence and coordinate that then allows the private sector to take financial investment decisions and invest in a lower risk environment. And I think we're seeing that around the industrial clusters as a really good example of where maybe there's a case for the public sector to take a stronger role in coordination. And maybe there's some lessons to learn from kind of development corporations. If you take sort of what's happened in London around Nine Elms, where you've seen the public sector invest in the transport infrastructure that's then unlocked private sector investment in redeveloping the whole of the Battersea area. Can we look at a similar kind of model in some of our industrial clusters where we're getting investment into the infrastructure coming through a regulated asset-based model through Ofgem into the networks, hydrogen networks, carbon capture and storage networks, electricity networks, that then allows certainty for the private sector to then follow up with the investment in the carbon capture and storage, in the hydrogen production, in the offtake arrangements. and how do we sort of break that chicken and egg through the government not spending huge amounts of money, but investing in the coordination that unlocks and de-risks the private sector investment?
I think that's very interesting. I mean, there's a famous Ronald Reagan phrase, isn't there, that he said, the most fearsome phrase in the British language is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Is there that danger? Is the danger of that coordination has to be more than, in inverted commas, just government to give that sort of investment? How do you drive that then?
I mean, I think a good model for how this has been done well is what Scottish Government have been doing through the SIM programme of bringing developers and supply chain together and having a trusted third party who has confidential conversations with developers and with the supply chain in an environment that is created to be safe. And then that third party acts as the guiding mind that's looking at, well, hang on a minute, that private sector player over there wants that, but we can see there's a supply chain partner that wants to do this. How can we take that information without giving away commercial secrets, but allow the market to then operate by overcoming the information barriers between different private sector players? So I think that sort of still using market forces, still allowing competition, but providing a layer of coordination in a safe space is one way that's been used very successfully in Scotland through the SIM programme that could be replicated elsewhere.
Yeah. Can I just add to that as well, which I find it sounds like a oversimplification, but what we see, so we now work with well over 1,000 businesses, and we speak to them and listen to them every day, and these are smaller businesses often. They don't have the time to understand a really complicated market. They don't have the time to read CP30. They don't have the time to engage. They're just trying to make a successful business. It's hard to do that right now. With the power of coordination comes also the power of simplification and, as I said, transparency. We're seeing that a lot of businesses they're not just disengaged, and that's really dangerous because it means they're not being proactive in helping contribute to perhaps the new reforms that could be helpful. They're doing that because they're disempowered. They've given up. They're just used to, okay, it's the big energy companies in the room with government deciding on the future, and actually there's such a role to play by bringing the users of the system, the independent generators, the investors in those generation assets, large and small, the actual businesses using that power and actually cutting out the people in the middle, right? And so that could really help sort of push the industry forwards, get the right people in the room, but you're not going to do that if you keep the layers of complexity and the layers of lack of transparency. It means it's just impossible to decipher what's going on related to your energy costs or your power or your next energy contract.
So I want to take us in a slightly different direction. So I think we've talked a lot about how we mobilise that cross-sector collaboration, but Rosalind gave us a challenge, and we love talking about electricity, so we've talked a lot about electricity. Who doesn't like talking about electricity? But we really not got that interconnected energy system, that breaking down the silos. And you said at the beginning, Rosalind, 21% or so of the emissions currently come from transport. Electricity by 2030 should be much lower than that. What are our strategies to integrate the electricity with the heating, cooling, and transport, and try and get that greater holistic energy management? What is the challenge in order to do that? Heat networks, not prevalent in the UK. Charging infrastructure still needs some work. Vehicle to X. They're all the sort of kind of new frontiers. So how do we break down those silos in this system? Is it back to a coordination? Is it an aggregation problem? How do we do that? How do we have a whole system approach, really? Rosalind, you brought up transport, so I'm going to go, there's a kind of rule, isn't there? There's a civil service rule anyway, that if you ask any question, you have to be able to give an answer to that,
Okay, so one of the questions up there, apologies, can't twist very much to see, so it's very exciting. I saw one about emissions and what's been the point. We've merely moved the needle. Okay, bashful Britain beats the G7, right? We have achieved over a 50% reduction in our 1990-based emissions, okay? America has achieved about a 20% reduction. Australia is plus 6%. So in your question about what's the point, what movement have we achieved, we have already gone to over a 50% reduction. The principal driver has been decarbonisation of power. That has been turning off our coal sites. That's been the number one mover. The number 2, sadly, has been the destruction of industry. That is the second biggest contribution to our emission reductions. So you asked me to say, what are the other emissions? Yes, decarbonising the built environment. The built environment produces the greatest amount of our carbon emissions, but about number 2 is transport. As I say, 2023 it contributed 23% of our total emissions. So that looks like a nice low-hanging piece of fruit. The plan, as you could say there is one, to decarbonise transport and heating is to electrify them. Why do we say that? Because if you've got decarbonised electricity providing the power to then heat your homes, to charge your cars, by virtue of drawing a decarbonised power system, they are decarbonised. Right, how do I mobilise this?
Yeah, so mobilisation.
How do I mobilise this? I mobilise this by looking at the sectors where I can still get infrastructure-like contracting, which for us is not retail and residential EV charging. The residential sector is not sticky. I cannot deal with the squatters on a charging point. I think the cheapest place to park a car is on Berkeley Square, where you can connect an EV charger for the day, and if your car arrived 3/4 full, you only have to pay for the quarter full of electric it gets to your battery, and you can be there all day. Anyone who likes cheap parking in London, go find. Right, so that's my problem with residential and retail EV charging. So I am looking at the big trucks. Arctic lorries, HGVs. Why? They have fleet operators who've set some strong emissions reductions, and they need the infrastructure to be able to either charge or refuel decarbonised fuel to keep their fleet on the road. Because a fleet operator makes money by getting that lorry from A to B. They don't make money so much from the lorry, it's the delivery. They need their lorries on the move. They do not need their lorries stuck waiting to charge or stuck waiting to refuel. So what we are doing is we've partnered with a business called Aegis, who are seeking to get their contracts with the fleet operators and provide a networking of charging infrastructure that means if a lorry driver is stuck on the M5 because there's been a pile-up, they could delay their booking in slot. But what the fleet operator gets is certainty that when that lorry driver gets to the charging point, they can recharge straight away. The lorry will be back on the road as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. So that's my solution to the transport. I would say, though, having been a bit negative and being very contrary, and poor Joe's been so patient with me, as has Mark, that it is not going to happen. We will not build 86 Cleve Hills in the next 4.5 years. But what we can do, because what homeowners have, and retail and small C&I have, they're nimble. They're faster, they can make their decisions that much quicker. We can learn from Germany's incentive program, which encouraged behind-the-meter storage to complement behind-the-meter solar. Germany had a solar eclipse in about 2013, and they suddenly noticed their grid having a massive stability issue, and that's because all of the rooftop solar that they couldn't see suddenly stopped exporting for about 8 minutes.
Yeah.
They put in place behind-the-meter storage. That program, KfW-backed, made itself redundant in less than 5 years. In less than 5 years, homeowners realised they could get a payback period that was attractive on behind-the-meter storage. And why is that so attractive? Is that's a program that delivered substantial capacity in less than 5 years. It made itself redundant as a form of financial incentive, and it was incredibly deliverable scale, which when you can manage something like a virtual power plant, as a company of ours in Edinburgh, Flexitricity you can actually help deliver then a smart grid that is able to have homeowners part of the solution on the demand-supply imbalance, as National Grid adopted when our coal wasn't available to be our backup source of power.
So I think, Rosalind, actually you're saying local solutions are the way forward, which I think is quite interesting, because that's kind of where we started. But can we empower the consumers, Joe, with things like AI to make this kind of local consumerism, or is it data, is it visibility? Sorry, I've said the AI word, haven't I? I got to 9 minutes before the end without mentioning the word AI. Yeah, but how can we empower consumers, therefore, to think they're more part of this, to break down the silos? Transport and home heating are clearly more personal to people, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and yeah, it's actually really nice to be on a panel that isn't just talking about AI and disruption as a player in that space, and actually talking about
sorry
the
if you
whole
wanted to
system.
talk about AI.
But look, I think what we have learned is even using AI, maybe that helps on the education of the magic that suddenly makes it feel different, but ultimately it comes back to building a better product. If you build a better product, you're not trying to educate someone to make a decision out of moral obligation. You're not trying to say you need to do this for the benefit of you or the family. Or if you just make a better product that in turn delivers either the reduction in emissions or the system requirements, and the government can help support the delivery of that product, people will move. I think the slight difference I'm seeing compared to, say, what we've learned in fintech, which is a great example of what the government did right to enable challengers to come in and ultimately benefit to flow through to homes and businesses of all sizes. There's only a slight difference, is people don't check their energy account every single day. There's a less engagement with their energy than there is with their money. And so you're never going to quite get that full buy-in and engagement without making it incredibly simple, very low effort, and just a better product all around to allow them to actually do what they want to do. Businesses, do more business, or consumers get more protection over their costs. So that's where we would always default to in that
Randolph,
space.
how are you going to break down the silos?
Yes, I 100% agree with Joe. Like, it's got to be cheap, easy, simple solutions. I think at the end of the day, our customers, a lot of them are not experts in energy. They just don't have the time, the skills, the knowledge, so they need something that's simple and easy to use. Things like, home as a service, energy as a service, these sorts of solutions are quite important. From a financing perspective, one of the biggest challenges we see for them is the CapEx. Yeah. At the end of the day, you can use software to do some things and optimize some things, but a lot of what we're talking about requires an additional CapEx injection, whether it's a battery or an EV or a solar PV on your roof. And that upfront CapEx cost can be a challenge for a home or a small business. So that's why we're looking at working with different providers and also creating different financial solutions that can either lower or defer that CapEx cost, or sometimes even remove it entirely. Yeah. If you think about a leasing or an energy as a service model. So we have different solutions like green mortgages, equipment finance, etc., which can sort of lower, remove, or defer that upfront CapEx cost to help them roll out. And again, a business doesn't care about one energy vector or one solution. Yeah. Gas, electricity, whatever it is, they just want to decarbonize and lower the costs of all of it. Yeah. So again, having a simple solution to come in, combined with some sort of maybe more agile financial product that can help them deal with that CapEx injection that's required, is how I would break down those silos.
Mark, how would you break down those silos?
Yeah, I think the integration of heat, electricity, and transport is the really tricky problem at the local level, because if you think the future is an EV on every driveway and a heat pump in every home, the work that we've done on those local area energy plans sort of shows that you need an electricity distribution network up every street that's about 3 times the size of the one we've got today. Even if you make the most optimistic assumptions you can around shifting the peak either through local storage or through consumer behaviour, a lot of which is untested, and I think there's a huge amount of uncertainty around the role of AI, but also the role of the consumer in accepting kind of vehicle to grid and the ability to shift peak to average. So I think in terms of sort of breaking down the silos, there's more to be done to test that actually the right answer is full electrification of heat and transport. And I think there's more analysis and more work to be done looking at the role of heat networks, the role of hydrogen in that integrated energy system that makes sure that what we end up with is genuinely the lowest whole energy system we can come up with. And right in the middle of that is, what's the consumer experience of this transition? How do we help fund it? Where's the costs being borne? and are we offering the consumer something better than that they've currently got that enables them to take it up?
Right, so we're right near the end now. So I'm going to go down the line and say thank you very much, Mark, for that. I'm going to go, and I think that consumer centrality is important. I'm going to go down the line. You've got 30 seconds to say what you're going to do, what your most important take-home point is with respect to a whole systems approach to the transition. I'll start with you, Joe.
30 seconds. I'll actually touch a little bit on some of these questions. So when we think about where we sit today, if we allow big energy to build big projects that are tied to a wholesale market unchanged, potentially making it even more complex and with an opportunity for monopolization through things like zonal pricing, we're going to end up missing the boat on what is perhaps one of the best generational chances to transform a system to actually work for the 99%, not the 1%. So what TEM is there to do is fight for that, and fight for that really hard by building a better product and a better transaction infrastructure to support all of the rest of the delivery that's sitting here at the table of financial products and infrastructure to those customers. And that's the thing that I'm most passionate about fighting for every single day.
Randolph.
Yeah, so in the whole system space, what's often forgotten is the supply chain. And it's often very difficult for our customers to decarbonize their supply chain and lower the costs of their supply chain and even understand their scope 3 emissions. So I would encourage anyone who is struggling with that to come and speak with us about how we can help map out your supply chain, understand those emissions, and offer things like sustainable supply chain finance solutions.
Rosalind.
There's no energy transition without it being a just transition, because if we alienate those who are left behind, they will resist. And we need to share the economic wealth and benefit of the green transition to the extent that we need to increase the number of high-skilled workers, because currently, if you want to get your electricity project connected, protect your SAP. That's your senior authorized person, because without your SAP, your project doesn't connected, and there aren't enough of them to connect every project that is coming along. So train people and bring them with you on this transition.
Mark.
So 3 words, aggregation. How do we aggregate up local area energy projects so that they are investable? Coordination. How do we bring the public sector and the private sector together to unlock that financial investment and to make sure projects are sequenced? And finally, delivery. How do we get delivery done, and what are the innovative delivery models that are required that enables us to make that transition to Clean Power 2030?
Well, thank you very much to all my panel. I think we've got some really strong take-home messages from this panel today. It's been really great to have you all. We've heard really, and we've ended with the consumer-centric part of this, be that consumer, be a business, be that consumer, a domestic consumer. We've also got the balance between aggregation, the role of government and de-risking, the role of public and private partnership, the role of building up projects to be investable around that. But we've also argued that disaggregation is important and understanding the smaller scale and local scale, and these two are not in contradiction. If we're going to have a systems approach, the system has got to operate on all levels. We've got to coordinate, we've got to connect, and we've got to inform as well as part of this. So thank you very much to my panel today for what has been a really fascinating discussion on how to take a whole systems approach to the transition. Hopefully we've given you some insights in the audience, answered some of your wonderful questions. There are a lot more. We could have spent hours talking about some of those. Thank you very much indeed, and enjoy the rest of your day.